Hey, everybody. This is Nick Heudecker. I am the Senior Director of Market Strategy and Competitive Intelligence at Cribl. And I am hosting another data mesh learning vendor event, this time with Spectre Data. Spectre is a new company in the data mesh space, and I'm joined by Ashwin Kamath today. Ashwin, go ahead and give me an intro before we kick it off and talk about your company.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I first want to give a shout out to the data mesh community. I think the way that things have been laid out in terms of what the problem space around dealing with data is very well thought out. And I've learned a lot, I've contributed, whatnot, and hope to really grow with this community. Quick introduction about myself. So I'm the founder of Spectre, spectredata.com. I founded the company about a little over a year ago now. We're a seed stage company moving towards like our first 100 customers. And in general, we are a data infrastructure platform designed to really deal with a lot of the problems that companies face when handling critical production grade data. My background, I come from the fintech industry where I used to work at a company called Affirm out in San Francisco, buy now, pay later company. I worked on the underwriting and automation systems there to both deal with front office underwriting as well as back office reporting. And then more recently came from Two Sigma, a quantitative hedge fund out here in New York, where I was handling a lot of the data ingestion, normalization for, and cleaning that whatnot for the alternative data division there at Two Sigma.
Nice, nice. So Spectre is about a year old. You said it's seed stage. About how many people are at the company today?
Yeah, we have about 10 people. I would say about 5, 6 on our core team here in New York. And then, a few folks who are kind of in a global operation and remote setting who help kind of like operate the platform.
And then are you the sole founder or do you have co-founders as well?
I'm the sole founder.
Okay.
I have a very,
Great.
very
So,
strong team of like data and ML ops people.
okay. Yeah. I think, early on, those small teams are best, right? You can move really
Right.
quickly and advance the story nicely for your customers. Um, so, you talked about kind of moving production grade data around. Um, Sounds like a lot of companies do that today, right? Whether they're data integration companies, whether companies that maybe just using open source like Airflow, et cetera. So, give me a better idea of what Spectre does. Like, are there multiple products? Who are the core users? But in general, like, what does the product do? What are its differentiators?
Yeah, so the best analogy that we like to use is essentially like a factory, right? Think like manufacturing, logistics, supply chain sort of thing, where within a factory, you think in terms of assembly line, and you have specialized machines that can do different operations, enrich the materials, combine the materials, package the materials, and then you have this kind of higher order brain to the factory that makes sure that as the items kind of flow through the system, there's quality control in between to prevent things such as recalls from happening down the line. And at any point, someone can kind of pull a trigger and say, hey, we need to stop the factory line because of quality control issues. We like to take that same approach to data. So we think of data or critical production grade data as, there's some sort of business impact associated with some data quality outage or data quality issues of that sort, where the data might not be updating, signals might not be updating, and they need to be feed into some sort of production system for the business. And at Spectre, we try to really treat both the orchestration layer and the data quality layer as first-class citizens, and tie it in a way that really makes it more simpler to not only kind of trust the output data that comes out, as well as deal with a change management process around that. Things like deployments, versioning control, connection to the code repositories, et cetera, and like simplify the process of being able to handle production grade data along with the maintenance and support workflows that come kind of after that. The main idea I think through is we want to be able to let data scientists and analysts go from handle it or developing some sort of analysis pipeline, deploying it, and then move on to their next project, and still know with 6 months later that their original project is like working and it's fine, right? And to do that, you kind of need to have like that data quality layer really be a part of the orchestration system, right?
So that, I mean, it sounds more data observability focused than maybe data mesh. Data mesh with its data products and computational governance and a number of other things. Am I missing something there, or would you say maybe you fall more in the data observability space?
I think within the data mesh analogy, we consider ourselves at the data infrastructure as a service layer, where we provide tooling to allow companies to create their data products and give them kind of this like robust infrastructure to build on top of, right?
Okay. Okay. So from end to end, I mean, what does that look like? You talked about data engineers, data scientists, so I imagine that they're pulling data from some source, doing some kind of transformation work to it, enrichment, et cetera, integration, and then moving that along through multiple steps. So what does that look like for the data engineer who wants to build a pipeline and then, on day two, leave that pipeline running for someone else to monitor, for you to monitor, and then move on to their next project? So how do I engage with Spectre's pipeline story as a data engineer?
Yeah, so we think of productionization around four main topics. The first is, the infrastructure level. What kind of like machine am I going to run this on? It might be a Kubernetes cluster. It might be on like a dedicated virtual machine. The second is around when it will run. So this is like scheduling parameters. One of the things we've also paid special attention to is being able to trigger, data pipelines off of source updates. So, when, the source of that data updates, you can automatically run downstream processes and kind of have this like assembly line process. Third would be around dependency management and knowing, which data pipelines need to run after which other data pipelines, and being able to kind of structure that network level dependency flow. And then finally, the last question, which is obviously the most important question, is the data healthy, right? Is data quality up to snuff? Are there any issues in the data that are hard to predict that might have happened that I maybe didn't put in a validation rule to kind of catch, right? And that's really on the observability side. We do have an observability stack within our platform, but really this is what it's aiming to do, right? It's aiming to tie back to the orchestration layer to allow a way to say, if there are issues at the data quality stage, don't let that data flow through the next set of pipelines and contaminate downstream analysis, right? It's better to get your report late than to get wrong data in that report on time.
Are you kicking off like an alert or notification when, say a given pipeline encounters dirty data? So in my space, right, in the observability data space, there's always like, oh, sure, we'll link to PagerDuty. You can build a webhook and call whatever you want. You can send an alert to a Slack channel. What does that kind of notification process look like?
Yeah, we support currently email and Slack notifications are our primary mechanisms. So the way that our system is currently designed, an email will be on file with the account. Usually that is going to be some sort of listserv for the data support team within the organization, and a report, like a PDF, like root cause analysis, is provided to say, hey, here's like the data quality issue that was identified. I think the key thing here is the next course of action is to come back into the Spectre dashboard and kind of start like looking into why that issue was occurred and what is the downstream and upstream impact. Being able to also rerun the pipelines in a way that is like operationally simple is a huge value add over what people are doing today, which is I may have my orchestration and observability system kind of separated. And so when there are data quality issues detected within the observability system, I now have to go figure out like, which Airflow jobs do I need to rerun? Do I need to restate some sort of history and backfill data? That sort of thing, right?
Got it. So a question for you about like kind of like organizations and who runs these things. Right. Because this kind of goes into, who do you sell to? Once, let's say I'm a data engineer and I've built my pipelines in Spectre, I'm good to go, right? I have confidence that they're going to execute as I've defined on schedule, et cetera. Once I do that, right, and I say, okay, I need this to go, to some other team or whatever.
Mhm.
Who takes over, right? Am I the data engineer, like monitoring the care and feeding of those pipelines,
Mhm.
or does that shift over to IT operations or some other party in organizations from what you've seen?
Yeah, I've seen this. It's kind of different at every organization I've seen. So it's interesting you bring that up. In my own personal work experience, kind of running teams within these divisions, usually I've seen data engineering ends up taking on the brunt of that load. And they may be assisted by a kind of further on data support team where essentially you have this like set of handoffs where you go analysis is developed by the data science team, hand it off to the data engineering team for productionization, hand it off to the data support team to kind of like monitor and kind of like deal with ongoing maintenance. I think very similar to how application data or sorry, application development, it kind of happens where sometimes the engineers who are developing the APIs are able to hand it off to like some IT and support staff to be able to kind of maintain it over time, right?
Got it. So when you're talking to customers or you're talking to prospects, what are the primary roles that you're targeting? Is it the data engineer, the data scientist, or is it that person's boss, right? Is it the economic buyer or is it the technical champion?
We usually target the economic buyer, as you say it. Generally speaking, we find that we are able to deliver more value when an entire team is on the platform and there's more of this kind of data network or data mesh development happening where, that's being constructed on top of Spectre. We kind of think through like, like what estimation of time is spent on like a lot of the redundant work and like the infrastructural level components for handling a data infrastructure platform. And as a lot of these companies have kind of developed their own solutions, they end up having to require a lot of staff to support that, right? And so one of our big value adds is being able to not only cut the cost and time, time to value for being able to productionize data, but also being able to do so with a more lean team that can also like manage and support those data pipelines as a company like continues to deliver more and more, right?
So is the core value proposition around the smaller teams, or is it more reliable data delivery? If you had to pick one, which is the more compelling for your prospects and customers?
Reliable data delivery, absolutely, right? Like
Yeah.
our
Okay.
thing is not that you in fact we haven't really seen how this is going to affect the headcount side of things, but there's also a world where because of how easy it is to kind of deliver on production data, you like there may be more and more investment into kind of this like idea of building like a data mesh data network sort of thing.
Yeah, I think like if you can master the data delivery side of it, because that's always the thing that people are like they're suspect, right? Like I don't trust data that I get,
Mm-hmm.
no one does. So being able to validate that, I feel like if you can nail that, that's not going to reduce headcount, it's going to grow headcount because people are going to want to do more, and so it's just going to lead to a larger and larger requirement for people to run all that infrastructure.
Right.
Um,
In fact,
so no, go
yeah,
ahead, take it away.
just a quick thought here, right? So we actually, a lot of the way that we kind of think of our positioning within the market is really focused on external third-party data that may come from data vendors, data partners, clients, that sort of thing. Things like software platforms that have to hook up to their customers' data. I think consulting firms who have to pull data and then build models on top of that. And the reason why we started with third-party data is because it's the absolute hardest. There is a literal organizational boundary between the data producer and data consumer that almost requires a level of robustness that is nearly impossible to kind of like guarantee. So the only way is for the data consumer to kind of like monitor and watch that data and make sure it hasn't like, moved in a way or changed in a way that's going to affect the downstream analysis, right?
I would think, all right, so maybe I'm being naive here, but I would think that if I'm paying a third party provider for data, that provider is very rigorous in the quality checks that they are applying before I go, FTP that file in or, go get it from some other location. Is that not the case? Are these third-party providers pretty sloppy?
I wouldn't say they're sloppy. I think the problem is just very, very hard, right? On their end, they also have to detect issues, realize they also have upstream sources that are coming from third parties of their own. And so I think it's more about the maturity of the industry and where things are going. But absolutely, in my experience, like at Two Sigma, we're probably dealing with 1,000 or so alternative data vendors, right? And like on a daily basis, several, 5, 10 of these data pipelines would break, right? And we're talking on the order of like, 50 to 100,000 overall data processes like streaming into the company, right? And so being able to catch issues that you can't even predict, you can't write validation rules, you just need kind of a safety net to be able to know. It actually is a necessity when you're building like automated data-driven systems, right? The vendor oftentimes doesn't have the same burden, nor do they have the same kind of level of rigor to necessitate that. And part of it is also that like you get what you get, right? So it's like finding high quality data vendors is absolutely a part of the equation. But one of the things we do with Spectre is we try to work on both sides of the equation, right? We work with data consumers, we work with data producers, or the data vendors themselves, and we help kind of manage the data quality so that as they distribute that data, they're kind of solving the problem at the source for like potentially hundreds of customers.
Got it. No, I think that kind of that bidirectional work, I think is I think unique in the space. I think a lot of people are like, all right, we're focused on tools for the data engineer, and they never kind of look upstream. I think that upstream story is really important and relevant today. You mentioned you're working on closing out your first 100 customers. When let's say I pull the trigger, I'm like, all right, I'm all in on Spectre. Let's go. How long does it take for me to go from 0 to a deployment that I can rely on? Is that weeks? Is that months? How much involvement do I need to have in the process? Is there a training program? So what does my adoption curve look like for Spectre?
Yeah, we have a full suite of documentation, which is generally the starting point with some tutorials. Getting started with the tutorials on our, so actually let me step back here. When it comes to like the deployment style that we follow, we have two types, right? We have our cloud deployment, we have an in VPC deployment where we will actually run a virtual machine or connect to a Kubernetes cluster within the organization, especially necessary within kind of like the fintech and healthcare spaces where the data itself is sensitive and that data can't leave like a certain premises, right? Certain AWS account, certain on-prem system. When it comes to the adoption cycle, generally speaking, we try to push for ways to show immediate value, like as soon as possible. So our data quality system ends up being one of the primary drivers there because it's pretty plug and play. You kind of point to a data warehouse, say, start training, you can start training the underlying models to kind of watch that data and observe that data update. And if there are, statistically significant events or anomalies that happen, those will start to be notified. What happens then is that companies, once they start to see the benefits of having a good, observability around their data, the benefit of being able to tie that with the orchestration layer starts to become more and more clear. And so that's when we start seeing people, start to shift over to the orchestration layer. We have still to kind of figure out what the migration path for some of these companies who are, on Airflow or who have built on Kubernetes. It tends to be a little different per customer right now, but something that we are looking to standardize over time.
I mean, a lot of these things are, a lot of these analytics data pipelines that I've seen are artisanal, right? Like they're cobbled together and it's almost like performance art for the people that have built them. It's like, don't take my baby away from me, even though it's really ugly, but don't take it away from me. Do you have challenges with that? And I'll admit, like in the space that I'm in, where we sit between the sources and destinations of observability data, so like logs, events, metrics, et cetera, a lot of people have kind of cobbled together homegrown solutions and they're very proud of them. And it can be difficult to be like, look, we can remove a lot of the toil. Do you encounter the same thing when you're talking to people? Are they like, you know what, man, you'll pry airflow from my cold dead hands?
It's happened occasionally, but what we
Yeah.
find is like people run into airflow issues more often than not once you hit a certain scale. And I would say that scale can be as early as like a couple hundred pipelines running on airflow. The operational overhead of just kind of like understanding what's going on, being able to re-trigger, being able to tie that back with like some sort of data quality check or series of checks is very, very difficult, right? And
Yeah.
most companies that have reached that scale feel the pain. There isn't necessarily something better there. I mean, I would say Spectre. It could be, it's that solution, but that is really where we see ourselves like being able to resonate a lot with the pain points of our prospects and customers and show them value, right? And be able to say, hey, look, like we will work with you to figure out how to migrate these pipelines. At most of the time, these are written in Python, so it's like as long as we have a way to kind of like apply some sort of driver for Spectre to be able to run these, say legacy pipelines, it tends to work out, right?
Yeah. No, it's a good point. Like you have to approach people where they are, right? You can't kind of imagine them in a new spot and then they're actually going to be there. But yeah, you have to find them where they are. Um, so I mean, those are the majority of the questions that I have today. I have a couple wrap-up questions. Is there anything else you'd like to cover before we close it out?
Yeah, I think I wanted to share like maybe a couple of customer use cases as well, because I think that really contextualizes it and that actually allows more. It makes it easier to relate to like this, like where Spectre tends to be
Yeah.
a better solution. So I come from the fintech space. Fintech is very core to like my expertise, and we are able to apply Spectre both on front office and back office applications. So think underwriting applications, pulling data from credit agencies, being able to kind of process that in an offline setting, prepare that for an online API setting, so that you can make like a 2-second underwriting decision when someone hits your website, so to speak. The fraud detection space has ton and ton of machine learning use cases where it is important to have that production grade level infrastructure to know that your fraud systems are working correctly. Business impact there can be staggering. But then also like the back office side, and this is a side that people don't really focus on too much, especially within the fintech space, because it's like the less sexy stuff, right? Things like regulatory reporting. Yeah, we have a customer who basically has to send their entire loan servicing tapes to a regulatory agency on a daily basis. And sometimes the regulatory agency will come back to them 15 days later and say, hey, here's a data quality issue we found. Can you replay this from 15 days ago? And it is a huge nightmare for them to like go back and do this. Then outside of fintech, we also work in the healthcare space, things like production grade ML pipelines for pathology use cases for doctors who are like constantly looking at this and where the stakes are incredibly high, right? It's you're thinking, right, like there are potential lives on the line. It's important to make sure that if there are data quality issues, that those are like caught and do not make their way down into the final decision, which is in the hands of a doctor, right?
On the healthcare side there, did you have to get any special certifications? Is there a HIPAA certification that you needed? Anything like that to start to handle and process healthcare data?
It's something we're working towards. There is no official kind of certification process that we're required to go through, but it's definitely helps kind of build the trust and reputation, which is why we're kind of looking to partner with an auditing agency to be able to get those kinds of certifications. I think when it comes to what really matters is the deployment style, right? Being able to say, hey, we will run everything that touches the data, we're going to run that within your data center, right? And we're going to do it in a way that is not intrusive and doesn't require that much operational overhead. That ends up being like the key selling point to be able to kind of like even start the conversation with some of these companies.
Like, definitely, we see the same thing. And it's frankly refreshing to hear that, what, a startup is talking about on-prem. Most of them today are like, they're in denial that, majority of IT spend, it's still on-prem. It's in data centers.
Yeah.
Granted,
I mean,
I'm
I
not a
come
blue.
from, yeah, I come from a world where everything we used to run lived inside on-prem data centers near stock exchanges, right? It's a completely different mentality. Cloud is definitely leveraged, but it's not necessarily the focus. And a lot of these bigger companies that actually can make huge impact with data tend to be in those systems. So, designing Spectre as a system that can be deployed anywhere, using some, things like open source technologies like Docker and Kubernetes, ends up being like a very, very valuable way to move forward with these companies.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's a great point. So where can people find, if they want to know more about Spectre, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, so I'm always happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. Our website is spectredata.com. That's SPECTRE data.com. And yeah, I'm out in New York. Can always, looking to meet up with people within the data industry who are visiting or who live out here. There's a very, very strong data community here.
So Ashwin, thank you a lot for joining me today. I'm sure the data mesh community is going to get a lot out of this conversation. And if I can ever help with anything, feel free to reach out. And if you have any questions about this recording, and if you're in the community, feel free to hit me or Ashwin up on Slack. Always happy to answer any additional questions. Thank you very much.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.